The recent Vatican document has shaken the Catholic world. What was expected to be a simple pastoral update has turned into a storm that no one saw coming. Across parishes, universities, and theological circles, voices are rising. Some are confused, others are deeply hurt, and many are asking the same question: what is happening to the faith we once knew? The document, titled Moran Populi Fidelis, was introduced by Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. At first, it was presented as a reflection on the language used in devotion to the Virgin Mary. But once people began to read it, something unusual happened. The faithful realized that this was not just about words or language. It was about meaning, about the very way Catholics understand Mary, the Mother of God. Within days, reactions poured in from every corner of the Catholic world. Scholars, priests, and ordinary believers all began to speak out. Two voices in particular stood out: the historian Massimo Viglione, a respected professor from Rome, and Mark Miravalle, a well-known theologian and Mariologist from the United States. Both men, though from different backgrounds, shared the same concern. The document seemed to weaken the traditional understanding of Mary's role in salvation history. Until recently, debates about Marian theology were mostly limited to classrooms and academic conferences. But this time, it reached the pews. It touched the hearts of ordinary Catholics who pray the Rosary, who see Mary as their mother and intercessor. What was once a quiet discussion became a public outcry. At the center of the controversy are two ancient titles: Co-Redemptrix and Mediatrix of all graces. These are not new or invented ideas. They've been part of Catholic thought for centuries. Yet the new Vatican document seems to downplay them, suggesting they are outdated or misunderstood. For many theologians, this was a shock. For them, these titles are not optional. They express the deep connection between Mary and her son's work of redemption. Massimo Viglione was one of the first to speak openly. Writing on an Italian Catholic website, he described what he called a progressive emptying of the Catholic faith. He warned that what is happening today is not random. According to him, it is part of a larger pattern, a gradual dismantling of the three great pillars of Catholic tradition: the Virgin Mary, the Eucharist, and the Holy Trinity. In Viglione's view, the Church is not only revising its language, but also reshaping its soul. He believes this process follows a global agenda, one that seeks to make the faith more acceptable to the modern world, a kind of universal religion that removes what makes Catholicism unique. He argues that, in order to achieve this, those leading this new direction must first remove anything that stands as a clear mark of difference. And for him, Mary is that mark, the greatest sign of divine uniqueness and mystery. Mary, the Mother of God, stands as the heart of Christian belief in the Incarnation, the truth that God became man. To diminish her is, in his eyes, to weaken the very mystery of salvation. Viglione goes further. He claims that the reinterpretation of Mary's image is not only theological, but also symbolic. She is being reshaped into something else, a universal mother figure, an ecological symbol, or even, as he put it, a pagan feminine ideal. He recalls the controversial Pachamama event in the Vatican Gardens during the Synod for the Amazon. For Viglione, that moment was more than a misunderstanding. It was a clear sign that something deep had changed in the Church's spiritual direction. He called it a scandalous and unforgivable episode, showing how some within the Church have lost their sense of the sacred. But for him, this attack on Marian devotion is only the beginning. He believes that once the image of Mary is reduced to a mere symbol, it becomes easier to alter the meaning of everything else: the Eucharist, the Trinity, even the understanding of Christ himself. Quote, "When the mother is changed, the son will not remain the same." Unquote. Viglione also connects this trend to what he calls the religion of Abu Dhabi. This refers to the interreligious document on human fraternity signed in 2019 by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar.
While the intention of that event was to promote peace and understanding, Viglione fears it signaled something deeper, a movement toward a theology that places human unity above divine truth. A theology that replaces vertical faith, faith directed toward God, with a horizontal one, focused only on human coexistence. His conclusion is strong and emotional. He calls the current moment a war against Mary, not in a physical sense, but a spiritual one. It is, he says, a sign of what happens when the Church begins to measure its faith by the standards of the world. He warns that once the logic of the world replaces the logic of the gospel, the heart of the Church
will be in danger. Just one day after the document's release, another respected theologian, Mark Miravalle, spoke out. His reaction came from the United States, where he published a detailed response on his website, Mother of All Peoples. Miravalle has spent his life studying and teaching about Mary, and his tone was one of both sadness and resolve. He did not attack the Church, but made a firm plea for clarity and truth. He said the document by Cardinal Fernandez was built on selective citations, meaning it picked certain quotes that fit a particular idea, but ignored others that would have provided balance and continuity. He warned that this approach could create confusion among the faithful, especially those who trust the Church to safeguard the fullness of its tradition. Miravalle's main point of disagreement was about the rejection of the title co-redemptrix. According to the document, that title is considered inappropriate because it could cause misunderstanding. But Miravalle replied that this logic is weak. If every word that needs explanation is removed, then even central truths like Immaculate Conception, Mother of God, or transubstantiation could be considered inappropriate. These truths also need explanation, but that does not make them false or outdated. He reminded readers that many popes, including Pius XII and John Paul II, spoke clearly about Mary's participation in redemption. To ignore these teachings, he said, is to break the golden thread of continuity that connects the Church of today with the Church of yesterday. When Miravalle looked at how the document treated the title Mediatrix of All Graces, he felt the same concern. The text almost completely avoided mentioning it, even though that doctrine has been affirmed for more than 4 centuries and re-emphasized by several popes. For him, such silence is not neutral. It is a sign of a new direction that prefers simplification over fidelity. He also noted how the document relied heavily on spontaneous remarks and speeches by Pope Francis, but largely ignored the writings and official texts of previous popes. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and even earlier pontiffs were missing from the citations. To Miravalle, that was more than an oversight. It showed a pattern of discontinuity. He wrote that the magisterium, the teaching authority of the Church, cannot be based on opinions or moods. It must stand on historical truth and unbroken continuity. Finally, Miravalle appealed to the faithful themselves. He reminded everyone that true devotion to Mary has always come from the people, not from bureaucrats or commissions. Through centuries, the faithful have built shrines, prayed rosaries, and sought Mary's help long before theologians gave names to those devotions. He ended his reflection with a solemn warning. The debate about Marian titles is not a minor issue. It is about the very core of Catholic identity. If the Church loses its voice about Mary, it risks losing its voice about Christ. Every time a title is softened, every time a word of faith is rewritten, the light of the supernatural fades a little more. He fears a time when faith will not be openly denied, but slowly forgotten, like a language that people stop speaking until one day it disappears completely. After the first wave of reactions, it became clear that the debate over the Vatican document was not going to fade away quietly. What began as a discussion among theologians had become a genuine storm in the Catholic world. People in different countries were suddenly talking about theology, doctrine, and the role of Mary in the Church. It wasn't just about scholars anymore. It was about faith, love, and identity. For millions of Catholics, the Virgin Mary is not only a symbol, she is a mother, a guide, and a protector. For centuries, people have turned to her in times of pain and confusion. From the great cathedrals of Europe to the small chapels and distant villages, her image stands close to the heart of every believer. So, when a Vatican document seems to question her place, it touches something very deep. Many believers felt that this new text was an attempt to change what had always been held as sacred truth. They wondered, why now? Why, after so many years, would the Vatican choose to revisit and revise the language about Mary? To many, it felt unnecessary and even harmful. But to others within the Vatican, it was a step toward modernization, a way to make the Church's language more accessible to the world. This division revealed a painful truth. The Church, though united in faith, is deeply divided in how it sees the future. On one side are those who believe the Church must remain firm and faithful to its ancient roots, preserving every truth handed down through the centuries. On the other side are those who believe adaptation and dialogue are necessary for the Church to survive in a changing world. Massimo Viglione and Mark Miravalle represent, in a sense, the first side, the defenders of tradition. They see the faith not as something that can be rewritten, but as something that must be protected, even when it is difficult. Viglione's words in particular have echoed strongly among Catholics who already feel uneasy about the direction the Vatican has taken in recent years. His phrase, progressive emptying of the Catholic faith, has been repeated in many discussions because it captures what many people fear but hesitate to say aloud. According to Viglione, the process began decades ago, after the Second Vatican Council, when the Church opened itself more to the modern world. While many saw that as a positive moment of renewal, Viglione believes it marked the beginning of a slow internal erosion. He describes it as a purification that never ends, where one truth after another is simplified or reinterpreted until the faith no longer has its full meaning. He points out that Mary is the first target, because she represents something that modern secular culture cannot understand, a human being who fully gave herself to God. In a world that values independence and personal freedom above all, the idea of total surrender to God seems outdated. But for Christians, Mary's yes to God is the very foundation of faith. It is the moment when salvation began. Viglione warns that once the Church begins to reinterpret Mary, it opens the door to reinterpret everything else, including the Eucharist and the mystery of the Holy Trinity. For him, this is not simply a matter of words, but a matter of truth. If the Mother of God can be reduced to an abstract idea or a symbolic figure, then the entire faith becomes a set of opinions rather than divine revelation. He also criticizes what he calls the globalist tendency within the Vatican. He believes that some leaders are trying to build a universal religion that pleases everyone but stands for nothing. In such a religion, the unique truths of Christianity, such as the divinity of Christ, the mystery of the Trinity, and the special role of Mary, would be softened to make room for vague human unity. This, Viglione says, is dangerous because it replaces the divine with the human and the supernatural with the political. He calls this new vision horizontal theology, where faith no longer looks upward toward God, but only sideways toward human cooperation. It sounds peaceful and inclusive, but it slowly removes the idea of holiness and truth. At the center of his criticism is a deep sadness, the feeling that the Church is losing its sacred identity. He does not speak like someone attacking the Church from outside, but as someone mourning what he loves. He calls it a spiritual illness that is spreading quietly through theology, liturgy, and even the way Catholics speak about their beliefs. Mark Miravalle's words, though more academic, carry the same emotional weight. His argument is that the Church is always taught through continuity, one generation building upon the next,
never erasing what came before. The problem with the new Vatican document, he says, is not that it denies everything about Mary, but that it creates confusion. It changes the tone. It uses silence as a way of avoiding commitment. When the Church stops speaking clearly about the Virgin Mary, Miravalle explains, the faithful begin to lose confidence. People look to the Church for certainty, not for hesitation. He believes that omitting titles like co-redemptrix and mediatrix of all graces sends the wrong signal, that these beliefs are somehow outdated or unnecessary. Yet in reality, they express timeless truths about Mary's role in salvation. Miravalle reminds readers that these doctrines were never inventions of theologians. They came from the living faith of the people. The title co-redemptrix does not mean that Mary is equal to Christ in saving humanity. It means that she shared fully in his suffering and mission, offering her will and her heart to God. In this way, she became a unique participant in redemption, not the Redeemer, but the one who cooperated perfectly with the Redeemer. Similarly, the title Mediatrix of all graces expresses Mary's maternal role in bringing the grace of Christ to humanity. It does not replace Jesus as the one mediator, but honors Mary as the one through whom the Savior himself came into the world. These are not small details. They shape the way Catholics understand the mystery of God's love, a love that works through human cooperation, humility, and trust. When these truths are removed or softened, Miravalle warns, faith begins to lose its depth. The danger is not open rebellion against God, but quiet forgetfulness, a slow fading of what once burned brightly. He writes that if this continues, Christianity will not die in a moment of crisis, but in a long silence, as people gradually forget the language of faith. Both Viglione and Miravalle, though different in tone, agree on one essential point. The Church is at a crossroads. The choice now is between a faith that remains faithful to its mysteries or a faith that adapts until nothing sacred is left. For them, the battle over Marian titles is not about words, but about the soul of Christianity itself. Their warnings have not gone unheard. Around the world, Catholics have begun to debate more openly. Some say these scholars are alarmist, seeing danger where there is none. Others believe they are prophets, calling attention to a crisis that has been growing for years. What is certain is that this Vatican document has done something few could have predicted. It has awakened a sleeping discussion and reminded believers that faith, even today, can still provoke passion, debate, and deep reflection. As the days passed, discussions about the Vatican document spread far beyond the walls of churches and seminaries. Newspapers, blogs, and social media platforms began to echo the debate. What had started as a quiet theological issue was now being talked about in coffee shops, on television, and even in families gathered after Mass. The faithful were asking one another, "What is happening to our church?" The reaction was not the same everywhere. In some countries, bishops and priests tried to calm the growing tension, saying that the document was not meant to cause confusion, but to help believers focus on the essentials of faith. They explained that titles such as co-redemptrix or mediatrix of all graces were not denied, but simply not emphasized to avoid misunderstandings among those unfamiliar with theological language. But among ordinary Catholics, that explanation did not bring peace. Many felt that something precious was being quietly taken away. To them, every word about Mary carried deep emotional weight.